BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. So, right now I am holding my copy of A Politics of Love, A Handbook for a New Revolution by Marianne Williamson, and let's have a little bit of a discussion. One of the things that I had been meaning to do for a long time was to get on Marianne's website, because she has a free chapter of this book available. And yes, this is not the full book. This is the free chapter that is available online. You can't argue with free, right? And one of the things that I did yesterday was not only read this, but also Marianne Williamson has a 1-hour presentation about the book, A Politics of Love, on YouTube. And some people are more audio-based individuals, like audio-centered learners. I had a lot of problems reading growing up, and one of the things that really helped me get into books as a teenager was using audiobooks. But now with some of the innovations with things like YouTube, just even hearing the writer talk for 1 hour is kind of one way to get a condensed version. Of course, you'll definitely get a more thorough understanding by having the full book. All right. So what does Marianne Williamson have to say about this stuff here? First, to draw upon something that she mentioned in her presentation online during the lecture speech, promoting the book, thing from the book tour, whatever you'd like to say, whatever you'd like to call that. I was very glad that she said something, that her brand of politics is difficult to convey to people. Because one of the things that I've been talking about on this channel, and some of the previous uploads that I mentioned about Marianne Williamson, was that she is a spiritual teacher, and that is something that has been heavily neglected in the Democratic Party. That sort of voice that has been covering like those types of bases. And yes, Tim Ryan talked a little bit about social and emotional learning and mindfulness and meditation classes in schools, but for the most part, this part of the Democratic Party has been completely ignored. And she gives kind of an explanation why, when she says that people who follow her spiritual teaching books, and she's written many of them, and her material, they don't want to get involved in politics. But then, the people who are political don't want to get involved with spiritual teaching. There's almost this kind of just rift and division. And she says that very openly, that her presidential candidacy is about kind of bridging that gap, because we will never achieve any sort of greater understanding in the world until we can sort of recognize that there is this problem in politics that is pushing people toward destruction. Kind of paraphrasing that, but she talks a lot about the dark psychic force, right? Until we sort of recognize the value of love and the necessity for love in American politics, and not only love, but honesty, when politicians are actually saying life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and actually meaning that, and actually trying to achieve those things for everybody. Until that point, until we get to that level, we will never achieve any form of American prosperity. In the book, though, I thought it was very interesting to hear some talk about like civics education, because when you think of Marianne Williamson, Michael Ian Black even described her as the future secretary of crystals. And I was even critical of her at one of the debates for just saying the word love too much. She's like, Donald Trump has fear, but we have love. We will defeat him with love because love is greater than fear. I was like, yeah, okay, but I mean, I get that you're all about love, but let's hear some more things about that. And one of the things that she did say was, in this book here, A Politics of Love, is we have a greater need for civics education. One of the ideas that I had in the past about kind of dealing with the state and local politics was give every student in the state a copy of the United States Constitution and a copy of their state constitution, no matter what state they're in. And it's like you could do it electronically with PDFs. It would probably barely cost anything to do it that way. Or even if you did, give them hard copies. You ever seen those constitutions that are in book form? Give them something like that so that they can learn their rights. But I have to say, though, Marianne gets to the heart of that issue so much better than I could. Marianne was right and I was wrong. That's what I would say. It's not so much just about giving somebody a set of documents or some papers that are stapled together and say, hey, learn this. That's not really a practical thing. What she's sort of saying is, we have a greater need for civics education in the United States of America. I will ask you this as our first challenge question. Did you have civics in your high school education? I did not have a single civics class. I graduated from a high school here in West Virginia. Maybe that's kind of normal in my state or something, but No, we had social studies, going K through 12 deals with lots of social studies. By the time we got to the ninth grade, it was U.S. history, then world history, and then some people went into the AP levels, but I never took a single civics class in high school. Did you? And, this is the stuff that Marianne Williamson is talking about. She's like, where is that kind of growing passion for civics education in our American educational curriculum? Because until people understand, people just aren't being informed about how the government works, how the law works. And this is almost something that is done intentionally because it's trying to keep the status quo the way it is. Now, let's look at some things here that Marianne has written in her book. This is on page 36. The guiding light of America's destiny is neither blind to our problems nor blind to our potential. We will be led through our current storm by the inner light of a more sophisticated, compassionate understanding that America is a continuing narrative. Like any of us, it isn't a finished product yet, nor will it ever be. A nation is continuously moving through time like a novel whose ending can't be foreseen. What we need now is a deeper understanding of what came before and a deeper commitment among us to write well the chapter that is ours. First, can I say, Marianne Williamson, I love you. There's so much optimism in Marianne Williamson's presidential campaign. And I was thinking about this because about once a week, one of those email chains sends me some type of survey. Who would you think about for your first choice for president? Who's your second choice? One of those things. Just a survey about the presidential candidates. And I believe we still have either 16 or 18 now. We've just seen Joe Sestak and Steve Bullock drop out of the race, as well as Kamala Harris. I don't know why I thought of Sestak and Bullock first. Kamala Harris has also dropped out as of today. But I never once selected Marianne Williamson as my first choice. And I was thinking back about that, and I was really wondering why. I definitely feel connected to her message. I definitely feel connected to her message about the politics of love and just the sort of sense of honesty that is necessary to have a functioning government. And I think it's because in the past I didn't really view Marianne Williamson as a serious presidential contender, and perhaps a lot of people aren't, mostly because she has never held public office before in the past. But at the same time, holding public office isn't everything. Look who we've got in the White House. Our president was a real estate mogul, the host of The Celebrity Apprentice. Did Donald Trump ever hold public office? He has shown us that anything can happen, really. But at the same time, I don't know, just have a few regrets, though, about not selecting Marianne in any of those polls, because, how is somebody going to grow if no one is selecting her? And I think a lot of the other political pundits and just other people who are in the electorate, the voters, are probably looking at Marianne Williamson somewhat in the same way, and it's definitely going to be hurting her chances of actually winning the nomination, not to mention she was excluded from the recent debates, so there's also that, and a lot of people just really don't believe that Marianne Williamson could become president. However, she might be someone whom they could look to as Secretary of Education if a Democrat is successful in 2020. It's now 2019, so we aren't completely sure yet. But at the same time, I just wanted to say that I just really value the sense of optimism that is present in her presidential candidacy. Whereas somebody like Joe Biden, I don't see that in him. What I see Joe Biden doing is, maybe I'm just kind of forcing a narrative upon him, but I was it just seems like he's giving out pre-prepared things that have been written for him. I don't see an ounce of honesty in Joe Biden's campaign. It's just something that has been scripted, as well as political consultants have told him what to say. That's what I feel, because I don't really see the heart and soul, except when he talks about the sort of personal stories, like maybe his wife and daughter passing away. And as well as his son, of course. Yes, I do believe there's some genuine sincerity in those things, but a lot of the things that he's talking about policy issues, it's like playing the moderate sort of center-left card, and that's it. Yeah, okay, Bernie Sanders is a little further to the left, so Joe Biden is playing the center-left card. But to continue with Marianne Williamson's book here. Today we seem tethered neither to where we came from, nor to where we wish to be going. We've lost the plot of our democracy. We're not connecting the dots, and we're not connecting the dots because we're not connecting the facts. We're not connecting the facts because the facts have been scrambled. Going back to our whole point about the need for civics education and education in general. And, I mean, we mentioned one thing, though, about mindfulness and mental awareness classes in school, social and emotional learning. And another thing that we've talked about on this channel in the past is about creativity classes, like just giving 1 hour a week devoted to creativity, or 2 hours or 3 hours, having a very specific time just for kids can create anything, just allowing them to sort of kind of unleash their potential and such. We definitely need a greater understanding of education. Our education system in America, forgive my language, but it stinks. Nah, just kidding. I wasn't going to use anything nasty. But in all seriousness, we have a lot of room for improvement. But when I believe she's saying the facts have been scrambled, I think that she's trying to say that our education is pushing us toward something that is not meant to fix the problems. It's just meant to further the status quo. Our founders sought safeguards against such scrambling, but the safeguards have been weakened. Thomas Jefferson wanted free public education because only people whose critical thought processes had been honed could be entrusted with the power of self-governance. And he wanted a free press to make sure that all citizens had the information we would need in order to make wise decisions. An interesting thing about that, I was once told that Thomas Jefferson said that we have, 5 freedoms of the First Amendment, right? Freedom of speech, religion, the press, right to petition, and the right to peaceful assembly. If he lost 4 of those, and he could only have one, which would he want? Freedom of the press, because that's the one that you use to get the other 4 freedoms back. And I think she's kind of promoting something like that, so he goes back to that whole thing about if they control how we think, they control everything. And it is through freedom of the press, as well as, of course, the right to petition and the right to peaceful assembly, but definitely through freedom of the press, so you can kind of challenge what people are forcing you to think, and you can do it more than just being one person. You can connect to a multitude of people. Someone knew exactly what they were doing when American civics and history lessons started disappearing from public school curricula. As I said, I had no civics education in high school. In 11 states, there is no required civics or American history education at all. In more than half of them, no more than half a year learning those subjects is required. But if someone didn't learn about the Bill of Rights when they were a child, how would they know to be appalled as an adult when they see it under assault? One of the things that I felt was greatly neglected, though, from just even history education, as I said, I didn't really have civics, perhaps ever. So it's not only, though, about the Bill of Rights. It's about the Bill of Rights and its relationship to the Supreme Court, because all of the amendments in the Constitution are not just words that are written on the paper. They aren't even things that are literal. They're also connected to Supreme Court cases over the past 200 and some odd years. The definitions in our legal books are evolving based on how the courts rule. And we know this very clearly when we talk about things like Brown versus Board of Education. The Supreme Court ruled and determined that something was unconstitutional. I mean, how many times do we see that and we hear that expression? But what they really mean is we need to know the Bill of Rights, but we also need to know the relationship between the Bill of Rights and the Supreme Court. But it's one of those things that is loosely mentioned in high schools, and it gets kind of glossed over. Knowledge is power, and withholding knowledge is a tool of all oppressive systems. Under-resourcing education, particularly among children, and corporate consolidation of the news, media, have been powerful tools in the dumbing down of the American mind. Without an informed and passionate citizenry, democracy is not a problem for its enemies at all. Okay, so in short, she's talking about not only freedom of speech, not only freedom of the press, not only the right to petition and the right to peaceful assembly, and not only freedom of religion, but being free to think. How can you be free to think if you are brainwashed? Now let's look at some things, though, that Marianne Williamson has been talking about here with education. She was the first candidate that I heard to support the $100 billion reparations package for African Americans. And that is a controversial issue. And I don't even know if this is an interesting side note. A person, though, that I found that also supported the reparations package for African Americans was Milo Yiannopoulos. I mean, I just really didn't expect that coming from him. Maybe it's perhaps because his husband is black, but he said this in an interview on the channel Chris Cella Conservative Talk. I believe that's what it's called in one of the interviews. I mean, that's just something that is, I found that it was kind of atypical of him, but I digress from that. One of the alternatives that has been provided to the reparations package for African Americans, and I know, we're just kind of segueing into one of Marianne's points, going from a politics of love to her reparations plan, is that as opposed to having a $100 billion reparations package, what you could do is just improve the inner city education. You could use those funds and resources to improve the inner city education in all of America for everyone. And that's not only African Americans, whoever lives there, whether they're black, white, Hispanic, Asian, Latino, anybody who's living there. It's like our inner cities are just greatly suffering, and inner city education is a good way to start at that. And it really seems like so many things in America are just tied to education. One of the things that Marianne Williamson wants to clamp down on is the school-to-prison pipeline, because that is something that is real. And when she talks about some things in this book as well, about how slavery has ended, and I was like, wait a second. I don't personally believe that slavery has ended. Definitely not even in the literal sense. I mean, when you deal with things like human trafficking, or you're dealing with people who are forced to do work against their own will, or not to mention prison labor. This is one of the driving forces of the school-to-prison pipeline, is prison labor is often viewed as a form of slavery. And maybe somebody gets 35 cents an hour or something like that. Prison labor can often be viewed as a form of slavery. So I don't really think that we're even quite there yet. I don't believe that slavery has ever left America. And during her YouTube presentation, I remember very clearly, she was talking about the concept of all men are created equal. And that's one of the pillars that America was supposedly founded upon. But the words are very, very, very precise. Or, I'm sorry, they're not very precise. But it's sort of like, first of all, were black men included in that? Were Native Americans included in that? A black person was counted as 3/5 of a human being, the 3/5 compromise, right? Were women treated equally as men? Did women have the right to vote? And even if you're going to deal with other white men, it was only white landowning males, right? That got the most sort of rights and privileges. So we haven't really had this pure sense of equality. Well, back in 1776 and 1789 and 1792, all of that, we really did not have that pure sense of equality, and all men are created equal. And you got people like Justin Trudeau, who want to go from mankind to people-kind, and I wish that he hadn't said that, because he, first and foremost, he was just trying to be humorous. When you hear people talk about that, changing the word mankind to people-kind, some people were just outraged by that. But when you actually hear him talk, he was just trying to make a humorous statement. But it's like, he really just did the cause harm, more harm than good, because then they're just like, he just turned it into something silly. He could have at least said humankind, if that's the point that he wanted to make. Another thing that Marianne Williamson has talked about, and this is deviating from the book, but she talks about the U.S. Department of Peace, having a cabinet-level Department of Peace. And she's not the first politician to talk about this. We've had people like Dennis Kucinich and Barbara Lee also sign on to the Department of Peace. I believe they have at least 46 people in Congress who have signed on, saying that they would support a cabinet-level Department of Peace. This was something that I was absolutely passionate about years ago. I wasn't so big on the name, mostly because of Suzanne Collins and the Hunger Games and their peacekeepers and all that. And in all seriousness, I thought it was something that could be greatly exploited. So I thought maybe they should call it something like the Department of International Security, but I was very passionate about that issue. However, I began to think that maybe we need to be a little bit more skeptical about things like the Department of Peace. How on earth could something like this be effective? And I really became just somewhat skeptical of the process of peace building, because if you look at the United Nations, there actually seems to be quite a large amount of exploitation, and it's also just costs are really go through the roof with the UN peacekeepers, according to certain studies. But one of the things to counter that was, somebody recommended that I check out Steven Pinker's The Better Angels of Our Nature. It took me like 1,000 times to remember the title of that book, because I always was quoted as the fallen angels of our time. He's like, no, it's called The Better Angels of Our Nature. And I was like, oh, thanks, yeah. It took me a long time to get the title. But I finally checked out Steven Pinker's The Better Angels of Our Nature, and one of the points that he argues in that one is that peace-building processes work. They are effective. And this is on the macro level. Like, if you were to examine the process of peace-building over, 100 years or something, you would see that the more peacekeepers that you have, the fewer violent deaths you have, the more of a reduction in violent death you have. So peace building is effective. And not to mention, the Department of Peace, the way that Marianne Williamson is described on her website is, it's going to be something like the military, where, you have the Air Force Academy and the Naval Academy. Well, you would have the Peace Academy, where people would go into the Peace Academy, and then they come out, and they would do maybe 5 years of service. It's not only using the Department of Defense, who would also have the Department of Peace, and it would be an actual peace-building process, and they would deploy peacekeepers to resolve conflicts in the world without military force. I mean, I don't know everything about this, but I'm going to tell you, this is one of the things that I'm going to be trying to learn about more, purely because I think that it has the potential to be a good idea. I mean, Donald Trump wants to talk about Space Force. When is he talking about the Department of Peace or something like that? Marianne Williamson also supports the Departments of Children and Youth, right? I believe that's what it's called, or something of that nature. So she's for the creation of at least 2 additional cabinet-level departments. Those are just some things to note. We've been saying a lot of very nice things about Marianne Williamson. We have been saying some very passionate things about Marianne Williamson. I do think she's a great person. Now let's give a little bit of pushback. Let's give a little bit of counterbalance. There was an individual named Henry Kissinger who had a lot to say about people who promoted the brand of politics that Marianne Williamson endorses. And what he would say about people like her is, Henry Kissinger, the war criminal, would say that these are just sentimental and emotional people who do not actually deal with the situations. They don't actually have to deal with these costly decisions. Like the thing where you have to say, 10,000 people are going to die right now so that 1 million don't die over the course of the next 2 years. They aren't actually faced with the conflicts themselves. And it's possible that, it's not even possible. Historians argue that one of the reasons why Grant defeated Lee at Appomattox back in the Civil War was that the Union could replace the soldiers and the Confederacy could not, and Grant had to make the tough decision that 10,000 people are going to die every single day until Lee surrenders. And then that's what happened. Nutshell version of the Civil War, right? But I think you can sort of get the idea what Kissinger was trying to say. But at the same time, Kissinger is also the person who said that the illegal we do immediately, the unconstitutional takes a little bit longer. Not to mention some things like overthrowing the democratically elected government of Chile, Salvador Allende, and all that, because they couldn't wait for democracy to take its course. Not to mention someone like John Stockwell described Henry Kissinger as the person who didn't get to sit in the chair that he wanted at a meeting, so he turned his chair around and refused to answer any questions in a meeting that could have dealt with the lives of thousands of individuals. He's a nasty guy. But when it comes to somebody like him, I try to learn things. And somebody asked me, what was the best book that I read last year, 2018? They're asking me, what's the best book that you read? And I said, World Order by Henry Kissinger. Because, first and foremost, I really liked his assessment of Joseph Stalin and sort of the reasons why Stalin failed. But the point is, if you're going to give some sort of counterbalance to somebody like Marianne Williamson, her brand of politics really is presented and challenged by people who are just saying, she's playing off of people's emotions. She's talking about things that are going to make people feel very good, but if she actually had to be faced with the tough decisions, you can't always just be like, we're going to deploy the peacekeepers, and then we're not going to have any wars or something like that. And I know that's not a direct quote from Marianne Williamson, but I would just ask you that as a challenge question. Do you believe that Marianne Williamson's brand of politics is just marketed toward people who are emotional and sentimental? Or do you believe that somebody like Marianne Williamson could put her brand of politics into effect as President of the United States and be successful? That's really the biggest challenge question. Do you think Marianne Williamson could be a successful president? I'm going to keep going through some things about a politics of love, and I'm going to try and learn more about this because I want to know just more about the political system and how it works and find alternatives to the destruction that we experience on a daily basis. And I do mean on a daily basis. I mean, if you look at defense spending, if you look at the military conflicts that the U.S. is constantly involved with, we've been involved with the war in Afghanistan since 2001. We have people going into the military who are going to be younger than the war in Afghanistan itself. Absolutely. And some people, like Kyle Kulinski, are saying, if you just put a moderate centrist in the White House, they're going to continue the Obama-Clinton foreign policy that is just going to be expanding the war in Afghanistan, that will never defeat ISIS. Every 3 months they say they've defeated ISIS. Every 3 months they say Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi is dead. Do you notice that? It's a repeating narrative. And if you put a moderate centrist in the White House, then that's just going to happen. First and foremost, I would disagree with Kyle Kulinski because not all personality types are the same, and different leaders are going to respond to the conflicts in different ways. Not to mention, would you want a center-left politician? Isn't going to be so different than a moderate centrist politician. Center-left, centrist, that wouldn't be too much better. But I believe he wants to put Bernie Sanders in the White House or something, but we can talk about that in a future upload. And right now, I would just like to talk a little bit more about Marianne Williamson in the comments section and the politics of love and practical solutions, as well as Marianne Williamson's concept of just love and idealism, amorous idealism. That's the way we should describe Marianne Williamson. And once again, if you would like to get a chapter of her book for free, it's available on her website, A Politics of Love, and there is also a YouTube presentation about it all online for free. That's all for me now. Until next time.